Right, so America needs some cash. A substantial amount, actually, a lot of cash. We're not talking pocket change here. Let's talk about money. Specifically the jaw-dropping $514 billion the US government just borrowed. It's a figure that's hard to truly grasp. That's billion with a B. 13 digits followed by a dollar sign. Not the kind of money you find in your couch cushions. This is money on an entirely different scale. It's a number so big it sounds like a movie villain's ransom, but it's real. A real challenge for the nation's finances. To put it in perspective, $514 billion is more than the GDP of many countries. Entire economies smaller than this single borrowing event. You could buy every pro sports team in North America and still have enough left for a gold-plated White House, maybe even two. This isn't a payday loan, it's a borrowing spree on a historic scale, a financial maneuver with significant implications. When you or I need money, we go to a bank. We fill out forms and hope for approval. For the US, it's a bit more complicated, but the principle is the same. Spend more than you make and you have to borrow. It's basic economics, really. This isn't a one-off. This is a pattern. It's part of a much bigger story about how America manages its money, and it's getting more dramatic every year. The stakes are constantly rising. The latest twist: tariffs. A controversial approach to revenue generation. Why the sudden cash grab? Simple. The government is spending way more than it's collecting. The gap is widening, demanding action. Think of it like a household budget, a relatable analogy for understanding government finance. If your expenses outpace your income, you have to fill the gap somehow, whether it's a loan or cutting back on spending. For the US, that somehow is borrowing, issuing bonds and hoping investors bite. This $514 billion is just the latest and chunkiest installment in a long history of deficit spending. A trend that demands closer examination. And as we'll see, the government's other big idea for raising money, tariffs, is tangled up in this mess. A complex web of financial decisions. So, what does all this mean for you? How does this impact your daily life? Let's break it down. Let's simplify the complexities. Because this isn't just about numbers. It's about how the country runs and how it affects your wallet. It's about your future, and the future of the economy. So, what does it really mean when we say a country borrows money? It's a fundamental question about how governments finance their operations and invest in the future. The US Treasury issues bonds. Think of them as fancy IOUs, promises to repay borrowed money. And anyone can buy these bonds, you, banks, pension funds, or even other countries looking for a safe place to invest. Essentially, you lend the government money, providing them with the capital they need. And in return, they promise to pay you back that money, plus interest, over a set period. US bonds are considered super safe investments, highly sought after around the globe. That's because America has always paid its debts. So far, maintaining a reputation for financial reliability. Now, all these individual IOUs, these bonds, collectively add up to what we call the national debt. And right now, the national debt is not just a pile, but a mountain on top of a mountain, a truly staggering figure. The reason it grows is that every year the government typically spends more money than it brings in through taxes and other revenue. This is known as a deficit. To cover that shortfall, it borrows even more. And as a result, the national debt continues to grow year after year. That $514 billion figure you see, that's just the latest layer being added to an already enormous pile of debt. Now, it's important to understand that a bit of debt isn't always a bad thing for a country. It can be used to fund important investments like roads, scientific research, or national defense, things that can ultimately help the economy grow and become more productive. So, what's the problem then? The real issue arises when debt grows at a faster pace than the overall economy. When that happens, just paying the interest on the debt becomes a huge and unsustainable burden. And those interest payments on the national debt are now one of the single biggest expenses for the US government. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars every single year, money that could be spent on things like schools, healthcare, or infrastructure, but instead goes towards paying off old debt. And this cycle of borrowing more money to cover both spending and the interest on existing debt is only speeding up, creating a dangerous financial spiral. This forces the government to constantly look for new and creative ways to bring in more cash and increase revenue. And that's where we get to tariffs. One of the oldest tricks in the book for governments looking to raise some extra cash? Tariffs. Essentially, a tax levied on imported goods. It's a practice that dates back centuries. When a product makes its journey from a foreign land and arrives on our shores, the government steps in and slaps on a tax before that product can be legally sold within the US. This tax increases the cost of the import. Think of it like a bouncer standing guard at the border, charging an entrance fee. Not for people, but for foreign products trying to enter the American market. The main reason behind tariffs? Revenue generation, plain and simple. Every single taxed import translates directly into more money flowing into the government's treasury. For a government grappling with a substantial $500 billion deficit, tariffs can appear quite appealing. It's money sourced from imports, rather than directly from the pockets of citizens through income or sales taxes. But tariffs serve another crucial purpose. They protect domestic industries from foreign competition. If American steelmakers find themselves unable to compete with cheaper steel imports from overseas, a tariff steps in to make that foreign steel more expensive, effectively giving US companies a much-needed competitive boost in the market. The ultimate goal here is to encourage consumers to buy American-made products, support domestic jobs, and ensure that factories across the nation can remain open and operational. In recent years, the implementation of tariffs has become a significant component of the US economic playbook, often associated with the term trade war. Starting in 2018, the US has imposed tariffs on a wide range of goods, spanning from Chinese electronics all the way to European steel. In 2024, the possibility of implementing 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles dominated headlines, with the primary objective of safeguarding the burgeoning American EV industry. Tariffs are a classic tool in the arsenal of economic policy, but they invariably come with their own set of baggage and potential consequences. They're not solely about generating revenue, they also have significant implications for political power dynamics and the creation and preservation of jobs and the broader landscape of global competition. But the fundamental question remains: do they actually achieve their intended objectives and work effectively in the real world? Let's delve deeper and find out. Tariffs are pitched as a magic bullet, protect American jobs and make foreign countries pay. The promise? Tariffs bring jobs back, revive local economies, and let someone else foot the bill. But here's the catch. Other countries don't just accept tariffs, they retaliate. If the US taxes Chinese electronics, China slaps tariffs on American goods like soybeans. Suddenly, American farmers lose a huge market, and jobs are at risk elsewhere. Plus, the idea that China pays is misleading. The US importer pays the tariff, not the foreign company. That cost usually gets passed on to American consumers as higher prices. So, while tariffs sound like a win-win, they often end up hurting American workers and raising prices at home. The real world is messier than the political pitch. Tariffs can spark trade wars, disrupt industries, and make everyday goods more expensive. The bottom line, tariffs are no free lunch. Someone always pays, and it's often you. So, did tariffs solve the government's money problem? Not even close. Tariffs were supposed to bring in new revenue and reduce borrowing, but the reality? The government just borrowed over $500 billion anyway. Tariffs bring in tens of billions, but the deficit is over $1 trillion. It's like bailing out the Titanic with a teaspoon. Worse, tariffs can slow the economy, raising costs for manufacturers, leading to layoffs and making goods pricier for everyone. Slower growth means less tax revenue, so the government actually loses money elsewhere. Despite years of tariffs, the national debt keeps climbing and borrowing is routine. Tariffs aren't the silver bullet they were promised to be. The real problem is simple. The government spends way more than it collects. Tariffs haven't changed that. The borrowing continues, and the debt keeps growing. Who pays for all this? Pretty much everyone. Regular people pay more for goods, phones, shoes, appliances, if they're imported and taxed. It's a hidden tax that hits lower-income families hardest. Businesses are caught in the middle. Some benefit, but many face higher costs and tougher competition. The government collects tariff revenue, but often spends even more bailing out industries hurt by trade wars. And investors, like pension funds and foreign governments, buy US debt because it's safe. But if debt keeps rising, they may demand higher interest, making borrowing even more expensive. It's a vicious cycle. Higher debt, higher costs, more borrowing. In the end, everyone, from consumers to taxpayers to investors, feels the impact. The costs ripple through the whole economy. 2024 is a perfect storm: pandemic, debt, inflation, and an election year full of big spending promises and tariff talk. Tariffs on Chinese green tech, like EVs and solar panels, are meant to protect US industries, But they also make going green more expensive. The government subsidizes green tech to lower costs, but tariffs push prices up, a confusing, costly cycle. All this is funded by more borrowing, because tax revenue and tariffs can't cover the bills. The result? A messy financial puzzle with tariffs adding complexity but not solving the debt problem. The government's commitments, Social Security, Medicare, defense, infrastructure, keep growing. Tariffs haven't closed the gap, they've just made the puzzle harder. The $514 billion loan is a symptom of this mess. The debt keeps rising and the solutions keep getting more complicated. America's borrowing and tariffs don't just affect the US, they shake the whole world. When the US changes trade rules, global businesses scramble and uncertainty rises. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency, so America's debt affects global markets. If confidence in US debt slips, countries may shift away from the dollar, changing the global financial order. Tariffs encourage other countries to retaliate, leading to more protectionism and less cooperation. Trade wars make goods pricier everywhere and slow global growth. Allies feel targeted, competitors get more confrontational, and solving global problems gets harder. The $514 billion loan isn't just a US issue, it's a global one. America's choices ripple across the planet. So, what's the bottom line? The US just borrowed $514 billion because it spends way more than it collects. Tariffs were supposed to help, but they're a drop in the bucket and often backfire. The real cost falls on consumers, workers, and businesses, while the debt keeps growing. Relying on tariffs and borrowing isn't sustainable. It creates uncertainty and ignores the real problem, a budget out of balance. The $514 billion loan is a warning sign, not just a headline. America faces tough choices about spending and taxes, with no easy answers. The world is watching because what happens in Washington affects everyone. And that's the real story behind the numbers.